The curse Bharadwaja had flung in his grief did not fall to the ground. It waited, as curses do, for its moment. King Brihadyumna, a disciple of Raibhya, held a great sacrifice and asked his teacher to send his two sons, Paravasu and Arvavasu, to officiate. With their father's blessing, the two learned brothers set off joyfully for the king's capital, all unknowing. While the sacrifice was being prepared, Parvasu was seized one day with a longing to see his wife and set out alone, walking all through the night toward his hermitage. The forest was silent around him, the stars cold overhead, and he reached home in the last grey dark before dawn, the hour when shapes are hardest to read. Near the hermitage, in the half-light, he saw a dark shape crouched low. A beast of prey, it seemed, gathered to spring. Acting on a warrior's instinct, without a moment to think, Parvasu hurled his weapon and struck it down. And then he went closer to see what he had killed. It was his father. Raibhya, wrapped against the cold in animal skins, had been mistaken in the dark for a wild creature. And Parvasu knelt over the body of the man he had killed with his own hand, and the horror of it broke over him. The curse of Bharadwaja had found its way home, exactly as it was spoken. Raibhya slain by one of his own sons. Parvasu understood at once that this was no accident, but the working of the old curse. He performed his father's funeral rites with trembling hands and a heart crushed under guilt. And then, because the king's great sacrifice still waited, he turned to the one person who could help him carry the unbearable weight, his brother Arvavasu. He told Arvavasu the whole dreadful tale and then made a request. "This must not stop the king's sacrifice," he said. "Perform the rites of expiation on my behalf. Brother, there is, mercifully, atonement for a sin committed in ignorance. Be my substitute in the penance, and I will go and conduct the king's sacrifice, which I can do alone, and you cannot yet." And Arvavasu, noble and selfless, agreed without hesitation. "You go to the king's sacrifice," he said gently. "I will take the penance on myself and cleanse you of the stain of a father's and a Brahman's death." He took his brother's guilt onto his own shoulders as if it were his own, an act of pure love. It was also, though neither of them knew it, a terrible mistake. So Arvavasu performed the rigorous rites of expiation with full devotion, and when they were done, journeyed to the king's court to rejoin his brother and help complete the sacrifice. He came with a clear conscience and an open heart, expecting welcome. What he walked into was a trap, for here is the hard truth. The story turns on. Sin cannot be washed away by proxy. Arvavasu had performed the rites, but the guilt still clung to Parvasu, and it worked in him, soaring his mind with wicked designs. When he saw the serene radiance on his innocent brother's face, jealousy and a guilty man's malice rose up together, and Parvasu resolved to destroy him. As Arvavasu entered the sacred hall, Parvasu raised his voice so the king would hear. "This man has killed a Brahman. How dare he set foot in this holy place of sacrifice?" It was a monstrous lie, the guilty man branding his innocent brother with his own crime. The accusation rang through the hall, and heads turned in shock. Arvavasu protested with all his heart. "It was my brother who sinned, and even that by mistake. I performed the expiation to save him." But no one heard him. His truth sounded, to that hall, exactly like a criminal's frantic excuse. The more honestly he spoke, the guiltier he seemed. The king, swayed by Parvasu, ordered Arvasu expelled from the hall in disgrace, and every protest made it worse. Since he had plainly performed the expiation, Everyone assumed it must have been for his own crime. So now he seemed not only a Brahman killer, but a liar, slandering a blameless brother to save himself. He was cast out, doubly condemned for a sin that was not his, falsely accused of a horror and branded a liar on top of it. Arvavasu despaired of ever finding justice among men and retreated deep into the forest. There, alone with a wrong the whole world had refused to see, he gave himself to fierce austerities, not for revenge, but seeking something higher than the justice that had failed him. And the gods, moved by his virtue and his suffering, appeared before him in radiant light and offered him a boon. Virtuous soul, what do you seek? Here was his chance for vindication, for the punishment of the brother who had wronged him, for the justice the world had denied him. The forest held its breath to hear what a wronged man would ask, but in his long meditation, Arvavasu's heart had cleansed itself of all anger at his brother. So he asked for none of the things a wronged man might ask. He prayed only this, that his father Raibhya be restored to life, and that his brother Paravasu be freed of his wickedness and his sins. He asked, in short, for the healing of the very people who had destroyed him, and the gods granted it all. Raibhya rose alive. Paravasu was freed from the guilt and malice that had twisted him, and the shattered family was made whole again, not by the punishment of the wicked, but by the mercy of the wronged. Arvavasu's forgiveness had accomplished what no revenge ever could. This is the story Lomasa told the Pandavas by Raibhya's hermitage, and then he turned it toward them. Bathe here, Pandavas, and wash your own passions away in this holy river. For the tale was not only about two brothers long ago, it was a mirror held up to men who had themselves been terribly wronged and were still deciding what to do with their anger. And Lomasa drew out the lesson that gives this tale its name. Both Paravasu and Arvavasu, he said, were sons of a great scholar. Both had learnt at his feet and become eminent scholars themselves. And yet, all that learning did not save the one from jealousy and cruelty. Learning is one thing, the sage said. Virtue is quite another. To know good from evil, said Lomasa, is necessary if one is to seek the good and shun the evil. But that knowledge must soak into every thought and shape every act of a man's life. Only then does knowledge become virtue. Paravasu knew the difference between right and wrong perfectly well, and it did not stop him for a moment. For knowledge that sits in the mind as so much undigested information, Lomasa concluded, cannot instill virtue. It is only an outward show, like the clothes we wear, no real part of us. True virtue shines from within and guides every deed. And by the quiet river, the Pandavas took the wisdom to heart and bade and walked on toward the trial still ahead. A little more ready, perhaps, to let what they knew become what they were.